Just before we get started with this Fit Right Pelvic Puzzle podcast episode, the information shared in this podcast is intended for education only and should not replace personalised advice from your healthcare provider. Some episodes include fictional case studies to illustrate common presentations and how a multidisciplinary team might approach them. These stories are entirely fictional and are drawn from a mix of experiences in clinical practice, so any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. What if, in women's health, we are risking longevity for the sake of our vaginas? In today's episode, we follow Louise and the all too common conundrum of being prescribed low load and low impact exercise for her prolapse, but high load and high impact exercise for her bone health. Let's deep dive into her story, whether exercise can make a prolapse worse, and whether the precautions we are taking for our prolapse management may inadvertently be leading to poorer overall health. Hello and welcome to the Pelvic Puzzle. This is a podcast by Fit Right Women's Health, where we break down the different puzzle pieces of various women's health issues, and we have discussions with the professionals who can help you put all the pieces together. I'm your host, Taryn Watson. I'm a pelvic health physiotherapist from Perth in Western Australia. I'm a lover of early morning walks, coffee, red wine, and all things women's health and exercise. I'm the co-founder of Fit Right HQ, which is a women's health clinic in Applecross, where my team and I regularly get to help women like the fictional ones discussed in this podcast. So today's episode is part of our season called the Prolapse Puzzle. And the title is Louise, the 55-year-old facing the midlife, exercise and prolapse conundrum. So first of all, I'm going to tell you Louise's story. Then I'm going to answer three main questions that Louise had for me, and that maybe you might be wondering as well. And then we're going to finish the episode, as we always do, with pulling the puzzle pieces together of Louise's management and showing you how multiple different team members could help to ensure that Louise gets the best outcome possible. So here's her story. Louise is 55. She has two children, both born by vaginal delivery, and now they are aged 29 and 32, so all grown up. In fact, her eldest daughter is pregnant with her first baby, so the first grandchild in the family, and Louise is really excited about the prospect of grandmotherhood. She wants to be as involved as possible with helping with childcare, and that's what brings her to her issue, her problem, her dilemma, which is that she's becoming more and more concerned about her ability to be a hands-on grandmother who can care for grandchildren, because of pelvic health issues. So she had a hysterectomy at age 45, so about a decade ago. That was due to very heavy menstruation at the time. A year or two after that, she went back to the specialist because she had symptoms of vaginal bulging and occasional leaking with coughing and sneezing. She was told that, yes, she has a bladder prolapse, and she asked about surgery, and she was advised that at this stage she didn't need to have any further surgery because the prolapse and her symptoms were relatively mild, but she was given the advice a decade ago that she should do pelvic floor exercises and that a pelvic health physio could help with this. And also to take up Pilates, because this would be good for her pelvic floor, but that she should avoid lifting heavy to prevent anything worsening. So she didn't ever get around to seeing a pelvic health physiotherapist at the time, but she did make significant changes to the way she was exercising. So back then in her 40s, a decade ago, Louise had been really into boot camp style exercise classes. She was going to classes 3 to 4 times a week. She was doing circuit type workouts with kettlebells, dumbbells, HIIT type cardio stations like star jumps and box jumps and sprints and skipping. And after the surgery, and then after the prolapse diagnosis, Louise had to make a decision because apart from what she'd been told by the specialist, also she'd noticed herself that the main times she was symptomatic for vaginal bulging and urine leaking were during and after her boot camp sessions. So even before she was advised by the specialist to avoid heavy lifting, she already suspected that this was probably something she needed to do now that she was in her mid to late 40s. So she stopped going to her regular classes, and instead she took up reformer Pilates once a week and yoga once a week. So now, at age 55, she does occasionally leak urine still, and she's occasionally aware of her prolapse, but both continue to be relatively low bother. They haven't worsened. Where her concern is coming from is that she has a friend who struggled with prolapse symptoms that have worsened when she started lifting her toddler grandchildren regularly. And now Louise is concerned that that could happen to her as well. So that was the main reason why now is the time that she made a pelvic health physio appointment with me, not because of symptoms worsening, just because of what her friend said and starting to worry about what the future might look like. So on another note, and this is where this is why I want to talk about Louise and where this conundrum comes in, is she has just had her first bone density test done. She got advice to have it done secondary to having a fracture in a bone. One of her bones of her foot got fractured from a relatively innocuous trip off a curb. So they did find that she has low bone density. She has osteopaenia. So she has been told after finding this finding of osteopenia, which is low bone density, but not, it's the step before osteoporosis. She's been told she needs to lift weights. She's been told she should be doing impact exercise to prevent moving into osteoporosis territory. But again, she's confused and she's worried because she was specifically told not to do this a decade ago, and she's specifically been avoiding this type of exercise for 10 years. So during her initial assessment with me, we discussed all of that stuff at length. And then with informed consent, I performed a vaginal exam to let her know where her prolapse and pelvic floor is at the moment. So I found she has a stage 2A anterior wall and vault prolapse. Okay, so what does that mean? You can go back to the previous episodes. In the first episode of this season, I did go into quite a bit of detail about what the different types and stages of prolapse mean. But in a nutshell, for Louise, that means that the front wall of the vagina with the bladder behind it and the roof of the vagina, where her uterus and cervix used to be, they've both dropped down a couple of centimeters, maybe from where they usually would be sitting. And this is secondary to poor support of the fascia and or ligaments in the pelvis. So stage 2A is a relatively mild prolapse, and it means that the front wall is still not protruding outside the vagina. The front wall just drops down to 1 centimeter inside the vagina. I checked her pelvic floor, and I also diagnosed that her pelvic floor is really weak. And not only that, she's actually using an incorrect technique when she's trying to activate these muscles. So when she was cued to engage her core, which she said she regularly is cued to do and is trying to do regularly during Pilates and yoga, she was accidentally bearing down a little, not lifting her pelvic floor. So tensing through her tummy muscles, but pushing a little bit with her tummy muscles to down into the pelvic floor when she thought she was lifting. Okay, so that kind of brings me nicely into the first question. Louise's main question is, can exercise make my prolapse worse? Can the type of exercise I do, in particular heavy lifting and impact that I've just been told to do for my bone density, can exercise make my prolapse worse? Okay, so this is a tough one to answer quickly, but my first response feels like it should be, avoiding exercise is likely to be worse for prolapse than continuing exercise. Okay, so the avoidance of exercise and the deconditioning associated with avoiding exercise is likely to be worse than whatever exercise someone is doing in general. Also, my other go-to response is that avoiding or limiting exercise because of prolapse is likely to cause detrimental and cascading effects on so many other things in your body, so many other body systems. So, on that note, let's talk about longevity and women's health. Okay, much bigger picture than just the vagina-centric prolapse stuff we're talking about. Let's go global, body health, longevity, and women's health. Did you know that 6 of the 7 top causes of mortality in older women were directly linked to a risk factor of decreased physical activity? Okay, so that includes heart disease, stroke, dementia, type 2 diabetes, falls. And then with falls, you take into consideration how much worse the outcome of a fall in an older woman with osteoporosis is likely to be compared with a fall in an older woman with normal bone density. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but osteoporosis makes a woman 6 times more likely to have a hip fracture in her life. And we know that a hip fracture in an older woman, also called a neck of femur fracture, is one of the most clinically significant injuries in older women, and it's seen as a marker of underlying frailty. And I guess one of the really scary stats about hip fractures in older women is that the mortality risk is nearly 1 in 3 at 12 months after the hip fracture occurs. 1 in 3. And that's because of this cascading nature of what's likely to follow the hip fracture and the hospital stay and the decreased mobility associated with that, and then the decreased toileting capacity and self-care and possible depression and all the other comorbidities that might come along with that. Okay, I got on my soapbox a bit there, didn't I? But this is one of the things I'm most passionate about in women's health, is ensuring that middle-aged and older women with prolapse and incontinence are not encouraged to minimize physical activity because of this, and especially not to minimize the type of physical activity that is most needed for bone density, which is moderate to heavy weightlifting and impact exercise. Okay, neither of which are possible to achieve with only Pilates and yoga. Okay. So back to the question for Louise, can exercise make a prolapse worse? Yes, it could, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But it's not as black and white as saying these exercises are bad for prolapse and should be avoided, and these exercises are good for prolapse and you can do these. Especially if the type of exercise that you're saying is in the bad category for prolapse is actually the type of exercise that is most needed for longevity for women, i.e. lifting weights and impact exercise. Okay, so that brings me to the next question. Louise wants to know, are there types of exercise that she should avoid? I think the motto here that we should always go by is it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Okay, like I said before, not black and white. For some women, lifting quite heavy weights, they could be using strategies with their breathing and their muscle recruitment and things so that it doesn't cause a significant increase in vaginal pressure and therefore doesn't cause a prolapse to be pushed down at all. On the other hand, I've definitely seen women doing things like sit-ups and double leg raises and other core exercises found like that would be typically found in a yoga or Pilates class, that while I'm assessing them, I can see and feel that each time they're doing that exercise, their prolapse is being pushed down with every repetition. So does that mean core exercises are bad for prolapse? No, it means that the way that that woman is performing that particular core exercise at the moment is bad for her prolapse. It's very likely, though, that with those particular exercises, if we're using them as an example, that she could be taught to activate her pelvic floor differently, breathe differently, do the technique of it differently, and stop the downward pressure happening with the same exercise. And the same goes for weight training and resistance training. So ultimately, I guess what we're trying to achieve is to help a woman like Louise, find out which types of exercise might cause her particular prolapse to be pushed downwards, and to then work out, can we modify the way she performs that exercise to stop so much downward pressure? And if she can't, then we decide together, does she stop that exercise? Or could she wear a vaginal support pessary while she's doing that type of exercise so that the vaginal walls are held up more while she does the exercise? So, on that note, if you're listening to this and wondering what is a vaginal support pessary, that has also been discussed more at length in previous episodes, in particular the one about running and pessary use in a runner. I will do a future episode as well, deep diving more into pessaries. But in a nutshell, it's something you wear inside the vagina to give extra support to the vaginal walls. So, in answer to the question about are there exercises that Louise should avoid, research has shown that in general, exercises can be put on a bit of a spectrum from like lower risk to higher risk. It's not black and white, but there are types of exercises that are more likely to be down the higher risk end, and some exercises that are more likely to be down the lower risk end, which brings me to the final question. What should Louise do for exercise? Like if Louise is asking, okay, I want to tick all these boxes, what should my week of exercise routine look like? My answer to what should she do for exercise is Louise should do for exercise what Louise wants to do for exercise. Excuse me. Because the best type of exercise she can do is the type of exercise she's going to stick to long term. But can we find an exercise program for her that ticks all the boxes for health and longevity that doesn't worsen her prolapse or bladder leak symptoms? So her tick boxes would be exercise that will effectively build bone density, exercise that will get her being strong in functional tasks like lifting a heavy toddler out of a cot or lifting a pram into a car, exercise that improves strength in her pelvic floor, and exercise that she enjoys and she wants to keep doing long term. So that sounds doable, maybe, to get all those tick boxes ticked, but what this unmasks is this hidden conundrum that makes creating an exercise routine like this feel really tricky for women like Louise. So that's what I want to talk about today, this conundrum. So generally, like I said before, there's higher risk and lower risk exercises, right? So for increasing vaginal pressures, and there's been studies done with pressure sensors inside vaginas that, testing different exercises, and they've come up with some general rules. Okay. So generally, exercises that are upright are more pressure than exercises lying down, and exercises involving heavier weights and involving impact, like running and jumping and like ground reaction forces, are all shown to be more likely to increase vaginal pressures than the low impact, lower load versions of them. So therefore, they might cause more incontinence and more prolapse symptoms in women. So yeah, the heavy squats, weighted squats, heavy deadlifts, squat jumps, skipping, these sort of things would probably all be up the higher risk end. But exercises like this that involve heavier weights and impact are the exercises that are definitively shown to be best for improving bone density. And they're the exercises that are the most likely to be effective in stopping Louise going from osteopaenia to osteoporosis. So this is what I mean. Louise is experiencing what I call the midlife exercise and prolapse conundrum, or sometimes it's the midlife exercise and bladder leak conundrum, because sometimes the exercises that the woman has been told she needs to do cause leakage. I'd love for Louise to be exercising in the following way if it was possible. Right? I'm taking this from the Lift More trial, which I will link to in the show notes. But this is a trial that has been done that definitively showed that this is the sort of exercise programming that can improve bone density in women around Louise's age. So progressive resistance training is the cornerstone of it. So 2 to 3 times a week, she should be lifting weight that is heavy for her, so enough to take her to fatigue, with 2 to 3 sets of 8 reps of a variety of exercises targeting the big muscles around the legs, the arms, and the trunk. She should also be doing weight-bearing impact exercises 2 to 3 times a week. Jumping is best. But if jumping can't be done, there are other things like stair climbing and heel drops, where you go up on your toes and you drop down forcefully. Lunges with a big stomp as you lunge. They're all beneficial in bone loading as well. Maybe to a lesser extent than jumping, than big jumps, but still definitely effective. Just noting that cycling, swimming, walking, they don't count here, unfortunately. And then the third thing that should be included in her programming, according to the Lift More guidelines, is balance and coordination exercises too for falls prevention. So how do we make a program like that and a weekly routine for Louise that's also prolapse and incontinence friendly? We either need to adjust the load or fit her with a pessary or both. And we concurrently need to get her pelvic floor as strong as possible and get really good coordination with her pelvic floor to be able to get it to come on to support the vaginal walls as she does a big lift. We concurrently also need to look at her technique and the way she performs each exercise to make sure that she's like exhaling with effort and her technique is optimal as she's doing these exercises. And we potentially need to start with lower weights or even body weight only, maybe with some exercises, and gradually increase the resistance over time. So as part of this like final question of what should she be doing for exercise, should she give up her Pilates and her yoga? No, no, if she loves it and she has time, she should keep doing it. There are so many benefits for balance, for flexibility, and they will be improving her muscle strength as well. Possibly she has got community there now, and that the mental health aspect of it is really important too. Like she should keep going if she can. And she should also walk and swim and cycle if she loves these too, because these, although they might not be great for bone density, they're great for heart health. They're probably great for her mental health. Like whatever she loves doing, I want her to continue to do. But hopefully, what she can do is supplement these lower load exercise sessions with at least a couple of days a week where her gym sessions or with gym sessions or with like physio-led exercise classes like the ones we run at Fit Right, they're ticking the other boxes that are currently being missed with resistance training and impact in the previously mentioned forms of exercise. So maybe she wears a vaginal support pessary for the days she does these sessions or just when she goes to these sessions, but she may like to wear the pessary every day. That will need to be determined with a fitting session and asking her what she prefers. Also, hopefully we can, as a final part of talking about what her new exercise routine would be, hopefully we can get her finding a way to get pelvic floor exercises becoming a daily practice that fit in with her other habits because her pelvic floor is weak. And she's a patient that I would follow up regularly over a 3 to 6 month period to help keep her on track, to help recheck her strength, and to help keeping on prioritizing that strength training for her pelvic floor as well. There are other tools I could use as well, like feedback machines, vaginal weights. They might help as well with keeping her on track to get a stronger pelvic floor. So lastly, let's finish up today's episode with pulling all the pieces together, like we always do at the end of this podcast. So as far as the first puzzle piece for her management, we've talked extensively about pelvic health physio management and involvement. So pelvic floor training, pressure management, possibly pessary fitting, that would be what's covered here. Then musculoskeletal physio or exercise physiologist or personal trainer, and sometimes just noting that the pelvic health physio is also a musculoskeletal physio and can do this as well. Like this is part of what they can do as well. But if not, maybe exercise physiologist or somebody who is gym-based who can help her. It needs to be someone who is well-versed in both pelvic health and bone health. and can help Louise with programming this progressive resistance training and impact training into her routine that we've been talking about. Next puzzle piece, dietitian. This is a really important puzzle piece for determining the optimal diet for bone health and bone density to go alongside the exercise training. That's a really, really essential part as well. I'd love for every woman who gets diagnosed with osteopaenia to have a session with a dietitian to get some advice there. And then finally, GP, women's health GP, like the ones at our clinic, such an essential puzzle piece for osteopenia management as well. Consideration of medication alongside diet and exercise advice might be really important for Louise. Also, obviously, the GP is the one that does the baseline bone density testing, and then they would be the one that decides when a recheck is organised after implementing different changes. Plus, if Louise is fit with a pessary, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, it is a requirement for her to have a baseline pelvic exam with a GP and then annual checkups for pessary co-management. So that's where the puzzle piece of the GP might fit in as well. So that brings me to the end. And I guess I just want to say with this one that I love meeting women like Louise. I love watching them becoming more empowered to be the strongest version of themselves without that background thought in their head all the time that they can never lift heavy again because of their prolapse. And I feel like I made this case study be that she was told that 10 years ago because I started in women's health physiotherapy almost 20 years ago. And that first 5 or 10 years of my career, that was definitely the norm, was for specialists to be telling women with prolapse diagnoses not to lift anything heavier than like 3 kilos or 5 kilos ever again, right? And I really enjoy meeting women like Louise now and empowering them to know that that's not necessarily the case at all. And actually, there could be more harm being done than good for that, and helping her work that out. So maybe Louise will need surgery in the future. I'm not ruling that out. Maybe not, probably not, because she only has a mild prolapse and now she's on track to get her pelvic floor stronger and improve her global strength and fitness. But whatever the path for Louise, the big aim here is that she heads into grandmotherhood with confidence and trust in her body. That brings me to the end. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Pelvic Puzzle. And if this episode about Louise resonated with you, I'd love for you to share this with a friend or leave a quick review. It helps more women get access to this kind of information. And if you're looking for support, the team at Fit Right Women's Health is always here to help. Like I said, our clinic is in Applecross in Western Australia. We also offer telehealth appointments, and you can find links to book an appointment or an exercise class with us in the show notes. I'll catch you next time as we keep putting the pieces of the pelvic health puzzle together and saving the world one pelvic floor at a time.